guys, welcome back to the channel and thanks for joining me again this week. As I'm sure most of you will know, I'm a huge Charlie Christian fan, and my belief is that if you're trying to learn jazz guitar, it would be a really wise investment of your time to try and learn and dissect a bunch of Charlie Christian solos. Recently, I put a playlist up over on my Patreon of what I would consider some essential Charlie Christian solos to learn, and his solo on I Found a New Baby is one of those. This is one of those really early jazz standards, and it's played in a minor key, in this case the key of D minor. It's quite a simple one as far as the changes go, and that just makes our job a little easier in terms of analysing and understanding Charlie's phrases. And for those of you who are completely new to the world of jazz guitar and outlining the chord changes, hopefully you'll find some familiar ground with his use of the pentatonic minor here and there. As always, lesson materials are available at the link in the description. As I mentioned, I have a Patreon, or you can just buy this one lesson in particular through the Gumroad link. Either way, your support helps me to continue making these videos, so thank you so much. Okay, so let's start by outlining the chord changes. You'll see in the lesson materials I've included the chord chart, and I would recommend having that out in front of you as we learn the phrases, so you can relate the note choice to the chords underneath. So I'm going to play through the changes at a slow tempo, and I'll shout out the chord names as we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, D minor, to the A7, back to the 1, then make that a D7, G7, C7, F. A7 is a turnaround, sends us to the second A section, which is basically the same again. Stay on the F. Then to the B section, A7, to the D minor, G7, C7, A7, final A section, same as the other ones. So those were just the basic changes with no embellishments, and it's really important to get things down to that level to begin with, just so we can really understand how the phrases relate to the underlying harmony. So a couple of things to mention there with those changes. We started on the 1, that was the D minor, then we went to the A7, so that would be the 5, back to the 1 again, then we made it dominant, so D7, that becomes the 5 of G7, G7 is the 5 of C7, which is the 5 in our key of F, which is our relative major key. These runs of dominant chords, moving through a cycle of fourths, are very common. You can refer to those as a dominant cycle. D7 goes up a fourth to G7, then goes up a fourth to C7, and that finally goes up a fourth to resolve to an F major chord. Whether that's F major or F6, that would be a good swing option as well. The B section was a case of starting on the 5, and then going to the 1, and then going to that G7 again, and then the C7, and then the A7, taking you back for the final A section. Now let's get into the solo. So here's the first phrase, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's being played over this portion of the A section. Now what Charlie's really doing there is he's ignoring all of those changes and treating that as 4 bars of D minor. And really we can just think of this as D minor pentatonic scale, with a very clear bias towards notes from a D minor triad. Louis finally made another appearance. I think he's hungry. You a good boy. You enjoy Charlie Christian, don't you? You love Charlie. Now, at the tail end of that 4th bar, he starts to anticipate the next chord, which would be the G7. And from this point, he's going to be very literally outlining the changes. So we run down and land the major third of G7 on beat 1 of bar number 5. These little chromatic rundowns from the flat 7 of D to the 3rd of G are an important part of swing and blues vocabulary. Now if we start from beat 1 of bar number 5 over the G7, This here is outlining a G dominant 7th chord with the extensions, the 9 and the 13. So you've got the 3rd, the 5th, the flat 7, the 9, and the 13, walking chromatically down to the 5th. Now he anticipates the C7 1/8 note early. He grabs the flat 7 at the 11th fret of the B string. So again, switching our thinking from G7 to C7 in that moment. Grab the flat 7, come down to the 5th, the 3rd, the 9, walking down to the root. This is one of those very common Charlie Christian shapes. In fact, I'm planning to do a video soon that really outlines his methodology and these essential dominant chord shapes that he'd be visualizing. Now he's going to climb back up that shape. You can be thinking C7 in the most literal sense there, like a C7 chord with a D7 kind of shape, and just coming up through the D, G and B strings. So really he's dealing with two shapes here. The G7 was this, and the C7 is both very common Charlie Christian shapes. These shapes contain some really important jazz vocabulary. These are things that people refer to as 3 to 9 arpeggios. Going back to the G7, we can see we started on the 3, then the 5, then the flat 7, then the 9. So essentially we're thinking whatever chord we're on, we're going to find the 3, the 5, the 7 and the 9 to match that chord. Then the C7, we did the same thing, just kind of in reverse, right? So the 9, the 7, the 5 and the 3. Down to the 9 again, walking chromatically to the root. You know, Charlie will extend those ideas with chromaticism or with 13s on top in the case of that G7. Now in that final 8th note of the bar of C7, again he anticipates the next chord a fraction early. We're about to resolve to F. He grabs the major 3rd, then the root, walks chromatically down from the 6th to the 5th, and then a bit of back and forth. Really nice major chord phrase. So bars 5, 6 and 7 sound like this. You have G7, C7, F. Just one more thing to mention about that G7 phrase. There's a little bit of sweep picking in there. Try and go down, down. Charlie Christian had a real preference for downstrokes, as do a lot of jazz players. For me, as someone who spent a lot of time learning gypsy jazz, I'm very used to this idea of trying to start every new string with a downstroke. It really does help the tone, makes every note sound very fat and purposeful. And that's one massive element of Charlie's playing, is the confidence and conviction behind the way he strikes every note. Now bar number 8 of the A section, we have that A7, and again, just to see how literally he follows these changes, that phrase we played on G7 a moment ago, he moves up a whole tone to the A7, and then plays the 9 on the end. So he's using that same shape again, that 3, 5, flat 7 and 9, with the 13 on top, back to the 9. Now for the second A section, he takes the exact same approach as he did on the first one. He simplifies these first 4 bars to simply 4 bars of D minor. This is where having your triads mapped out thoroughly is really useful. Visualize a D minor triad here, string set 1, root position. Now add the 6th on either end of it. So that's this B note. That's giving us the sound of that D minor 6 chord. You know, a very common gypsy jazz or trad jazz sound. Even that alone sounds really cool, whether descending or ascending. Now Charlie will also commonly add things like the 9 in, or the flat 7 along the way to the 6th. So there's our phrase. Then the triad again. Now this is where your understanding of harmony is really important, because those same notes that we're seeing as an outline of a D minor 6 would also be the 3 to 9 arpeggio for a G7 or a G9 chord. You know, compare those same notes to a G root, and you've got the 3rd, the 9, the flat 7 and the 5th, down to the 3rd again, of course. So he stays within that group of notes for the G7 that's now arrived in bar number 5. Then the C7 comes along and he plays. Now on this C7, before we get into the actual phrase itself, let's just map out a few of Charlie's common plans of attack. So we said C7 is the chord. We're going to start with a 3 to 9 arpeggio, 3, 5, flat 7, 9, 13 on top. Then we come down, he'll often go to pairs of notes on the way back. So we went up the 3 to 9 arpeggio, added the 13, brought in the 5th, then the major 3rd before the 9, the root before the flat 7, the 5, often the 4 as well, down to the 3, or chromatically, or Django style. It's worth working on all of those different things. Get it truly into your muscle memory. He also liked to use that same cluster of notes in many different ways. You know, he'd often start on the B string, for example, like he does with this phrase here, the major 3rd to begin with. Working on these common patterns would really be good preparation. Now that we've had a little look at how to organize the notes, let's get back to that specific C7 phrase. He plays this. So the 3rd, flat 7, root, 9, 13, to the 5. Now, this is where things get interesting. So we're thinking 4 minor, B flat minor. If we're thinking of ways to get to F, basically, we can either go 5-1, C7 to F, or 4 minor 1, B flat minor to F. Charlie, like Django, liked to blend those ideas. The 5 to the 4 minor. Both are just good ways to get back to F at the end of the day. Kind of what I call cadence playing. On the F major, he plays this. So that started on the major 3rd. Again, visualize a triad if you like. F major. This looks like a D minor triad, right? But it's really just an F6 kind of sound. Bit of major 7, back to the 1 there. So let's put that together from the C7. Really nice 5-1 lick. Going on to the B section now, we're starting on that A7 chord. Now A7, again like before, we can be thinking A9 and A13, any of those dominant chord extensions. A common way of playing an A9 chord in this position would be to use this shape. Looks like a C sharp minor 7 flat 5, and it is, but it's also A9 from the 3rd. 3, flat 7, 9 and 5th. If it makes it easier to visualize, you can always hook the thumb over, playing the A root note at the 5th fret, or just visualize this diagonal line from the root to the major 3rd, or bar the little finger to bring in the root on the top. A lot of ways to visualize that. Now with that shape in mind and clearly mapped out, we do this trick that's as much a Django trick as it is a Charlie Christian trick. Arpeggiate that shape on the first 2 fingers. So 4, 5, 4, 5 fret-wise from the A string down. 1 note per string. So we're thinking A9. We know that that's an extension of A7, which we could commonly play this way. Take that middle portion of this common A7 voicing, and again do the same thing there. First 2 fingers and just arpeggiate. So we're really going from this to this. A9 to A7. And then we can bring in a couple more notes. The 13 or the 6 and the flat 7. That again is a very common Charlie Christian shape. Nice bit of A7 vocabulary there. Finish off the phrase with that same group of notes. Here's the full A7 phrase. And then we're on to the D minor again with that same group of notes we spoke about earlier. This D minor triad with the 6th either side and the 9 in there. He plays this. Sliding up to the root. Now on the horizon we see a G7 chord coming up. He's going to take this note and chromatically drop it down to the major 3rd of that G7. This is one of those very common ideas that we've seen a lot. We've used used it in tons of our solos, just chromatically moving down from D to B over a G7 chord. Now he takes it one step further and keeps the chromaticism going because he's coming down into this 3 to 9 arpeggio shape that we used earlier on the G7. A lot of chromaticism in there. On the D string as well. Now he's going to continue with this idea of chromaticism. He wants to get all the way down to this flat 7 on the G chord. So he's going to go slide. Now he adds an open string on an upstroke. That open string is really just there as rhythmic padding to fill things out so that this note lands on a strong beat. That's another very common Charlie Christian trick, adding random open strings here and there like Django used to do to make things rhythmically feel like they land correctly. Now on this G7 he runs up the same kind of shape we used on the A7 a moment ago. You can be visualizing that portion of your chord shape and just run up there with the first 2 fingers and then add the 13. Now on the C7 he plays this. So that's the 9, the root, pull off to the major 7th, down to the 5th, 9, flat 7. And then another one of those filler open G strings on an upstroke before going to the A7. Same shape again that we used earlier and that we used a moment ago on the G7. Now I'm going to play through the entire B section slowly and I'm going to call out the chord names as we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, A7. D minor, G7, C7, A7. It's all about keeping track of the beat, making sure you know where beat 1 is all the time and staying right in the pocket. For the final A section, he takes the same approach he's used a few times now, thinking of 4 bars of D minor and also using this shape, D minor triad with the 6th either side and the 9 in there before the flat 3. He plays 1, 2. All of that stuff is D minor. You're trying to get on the mic. Nice. Perfectly in key as well. Okay, I'll feed you in a minute, Lou. Just give me 10 minutes to finish this video, okay? Come on. Now over the C7 and F, he kind of groups this into a good old classic 5-1 lick. C7, F. Now to close out, over the A7, resolving to the D minor, he plays an interesting group of notes. A7, again like earlier on, things like the 13 and the flat 7. And coming down what really is like an A mixolydian scale, I guess. And then resolving to the root note of the 1 chord, D. So this solo, of course, is played quite fast. Gradually work your speed up. Like I said before, make sure you focus on staying in the pocket and giving it that real rhythmic punch that Charlie was so well known for. As always, the tone is in your hands with this stuff. Again, pick hard, use rest strokes wherever possible. Sounds very different to just picking the normal way. I'm using kind of a medium plectrum today. This is about 2 mil thick. It's a honey pick plectrum. But you can use any pick for this kind of stuff. Don't feel like you've got to buy special gear to play this style. It's really not the case. Tonally, everything's quite simple. I've just got the guitar cranked all the way up. Tones rolled back a little bit. This is my 1953 Gibson ES-125, and it's ideal for this stuff really. It's probably as close as I'll get to the ES-150 that Charlie used. Obviously the pickup is quite different, but this P90 sounds great. I love it. I've got 12 gauge Tomastic flat wound strings on here at the moment. but I do actually prefer round wound 12 gauge on here, so I'll be going back to those soon. I'm running through an Emprize Falcon amp, which is a beautiful handmade amp over here in the UK, and it's basically a clone of an old vintage Deluxe reverb, so it's very similar to my 69 Deluxe. And a huge shout out to Dennis. He's a student of mine who's become a really good friend. He got me the Stetson hat as a Christmas gift. Beautiful hat, sent it all the way from New York. Going to be wearing this in a lot of videos to come. Thank you, Dennis, an amazing gift, honestly. So I hope you've enjoyed this lesson. Let me know down in the comments below, and make sure to like and subscribe and share this video with anyone you know who might be interested. And watch this space for that video on Charlie Christian shapes that's coming soon. Alright, see you next week guys. Take care.